What's up, guys? Langosta here with my good friend and co-host, Jojo.
Aloha and how's it?
We are on our episode 4.
Number 4, cuatro.
Yeah, so we were getting subscribers. We're almost to the magic number of 50.
Whoa, that's a big number.
Well, it's big for us considering that we're at 43. So the reason that this number is important, it's because after 50, we can actually live stream. So if you want to see the madness and the craziness happen live, help us out and help by sharing, and make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and get us over that hurdle of the big 50.
The big 5, that big 50 is important, but super happy with how things are going. We're on our 4th episode, as you mentioned. Episode 1, episode 2 by this time have already dropped, and thank you everyone who has watched our Rifles, Rods, and Broads podcast. It's an outdoors podcast, and we've had a lot of fun. We've got a lot of topics to talk about, and we are looking for that magic 50. So 43, just 7 away. We're going to get there.
We're going to get there. Maybe after this podcast, hopefully folks will like and subscribe.
And we're not going to stop there.
No. We're going to keep bringing to you the fun and excitement of the conversations that we have during our excellent adventures hunting and fishing. And we have some trips coming up. We got some fishing trips.
We do.
So what's your next trip?
My next trip is actually coming up in May.
Okay.
So that's the one that I currently have booked. So anything that happens in between now and then is going to be special. But right now, the trip that I have booked is going to be coming up in May, and it's going to be from May 3rd to May 5th. We're actually going out on it's a fishing trip. It's on the Pride. So we're going to go out for some white sea bass and whatever else we can catch. It's a club trip. Did you book the last spot?
I have the last spot, so
Nice.
I will be going with you on that trip. Not only do I have that trip looking forward to, and I'm hoping we get some good video and some good content from that, because folks, when the Redondo Rod and Gun Club crew are on a boat, it gets pretty fun. It's good. We have a lot of crazy characters on our club.
Believe it or not, this is going to be my first trip on a club boat. So I've been with the club for 5 years now, and I know every year we've got our annual trips, but I've never had the opportunity to make it because our normal trip that we go on is right around my wife's birthday.
Right.
So right around that third week in June, it's like, okay, let's start collecting money. We got a boat chartered, and then just like, oh.
Yeah. It's a fun trip too. That one's out of San Diego on the Pacific Voyager. That's definitely a really fun trip. Right. So for me, I'm counting down my trip to Africa, actually. So that's
how many days?
That's June 10th. So we've got something like 68 days or something like that. It's pretty close. It'll be here before I know it.
Yeah, no kidding. Time flies by so fast.
Yeah, we got Raul and some of the guys we've been meeting at the range every couple weeks. Every other week, actually, we're going to the range and shooting. So make sure everybody's nice and sharp and all their gear's worked through. I got a new rifle to take to that trip. I saw it. HS Precision, a professional hunter. So it's a takedown rifle. I don't know if you guys don't know what that is, go check out hsprecision.com and look at their takedown rifles.
I think it's pretty cool, man.
Pretty neat.
It's like rifles. It's compact too. You break it down and it's literally in a small box that will go anywhere with you.
22-inch package. That's what she said.
That's what she said.
So it's
that's got to be my favorite line ever. Bad and it's funny too, because my youngest daughter, who's 10 years old, for the past 2 years, she's gotten into that show, The Office, and I don't know, she's got mom and dad's personality, and she busts that out every once in a while. Whenever she says it, it's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. We got a really good episode tonight. Tonight we are talking about what, Jojo?
We are talking about out-of-state hunting and whether or not you choose to drive or fly. That is the question of the night.
All right.
And I think it's a good question, right? Because, whenever you kind of get into the hunting scene and you're deciding on whether or not you're going to go out of state hunting, when you do make that leap and you do go out of state, you're left with a couple of options. And those two options are, how am I going to get there? Am I going to fly there, or am I going to drive there? And I think there's a lot of things to consider. And some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight are going to be talking about cost. We're going to be talking about time, and we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of flying versus driving, because whether or not you choose one or the other, you've got to kind of weigh your options. So
for sure. There's different logistical challenges for each one, right?
There are definitely, especially here on the West Coast, Western big game hunting when you go out, because California, let's face it, right? Let's be super transparent in regard to if you're choosing to go elk hunting, and that would personally be my number one choice when it comes to big game animals is elk hunting.
Right.
So in order for even a local resident here in California, it's going to take some time to draw an elk tag. So where the opportunity is at is going to be kind of the Western states that are neighboring us, whether
Colorado, New Mexico, Idaho, or Utah,
Arizona, Wyoming. And when you start to look at the map, it's all about how am I going to get there?
For sure.
So, you've been Western big game hunting in the Western states, and you've probably driven and you've probably flown. What's your preference?
For elk hunting, Colorado, I would always drive there. I don't know a scenario where, I would drive my dually.
You would drive a dually.
Give me the dually. Give me the dually sound.
Yeah, if it ain't got 6 tires, I ain't taking it.
That's the dually. Yeah, I definitely would take my dually out there. And I've driven to Texas on a whitetail hunt, and I've driven to Colorado 4 times, I want to say now, on elk hunts. I think for me, you got to drive to Colorado, mostly because the elk hunts that I've gone on, we go camping. So we'll do a drop camp. We'll get taken up by mule string,
right,
up into the flat tops, which are up in the Rocky Mountains. And you need gear. You need to take gear because you're going to be sleeping there for a week or so. And then there's the meat. You got a pretty good chance of getting a nice elk if you go elk hunting in Colorado.
You do.
So you have to have a cooler and ice and all that. And I think like some of the other club members have a lot of experience bringing meat and stuff on the plane and all that. And I have yet to do that, but maybe, I don't know, maybe if I do that on this trip, if I make it to Maui and go hunt axis deer with you guys, maybe I'll change my mind about that. But for an elk, I think I brought back something like 350 pounds of meat or something like that. It's quite a bit.
Yeah, and those are some of the things that we kind of want to discuss on tonight's show, because there are choices, right? Some people, they can't stand driving or long drives and they choose to fly. Well, what are some of the pros and cons? What are you giving? What are you taking when you choose either or? Because you can get anywhere using both modes of transportation. But obviously there's going to be some differences in terms of, okay, well, what is it going to cost if I choose to drive? What is it going to cost when I choose to fly? And also, too, what are some of the things that people need to consider when they choose either mode of transportation? Because there are some places, like you look at Montana, and all you need to do is like look at a map of the United States and say, oh, Montana's far.
Yeah.
And then you end up in a predicament in regard to, what is going to be the benefit of driving and what is going to be the benefit of flying and what am I going to choose to do? There are some states that neighbor us that to me, there's no question. You're going to jump in the car and you're going to drive.
Yeah. Right? If you're hunting Arizona, even New Mexico, I think driving, no doubt about it. But I'll tell you one thing that really, I think in my mind is the determining factor. It's how much support gear will you have at the destination?
Yes.
So if you've got other people, other buddies, other hunting buddies that are going to drive and they'll have a 4x4 or side by side, they're taking the tents, they're taking the coolers to bring the food back, then you could potentially pack, 2 bags, right, one with your clothes, one with your rifle, and maybe a third bag with your camping gear, unless you want to throw it on their truck on their way there. But as they leave and they take your gear for you. So for me, I think it's mostly about what are you going to need on the hunt, and logistically, are you bringing meat back? Whether you bring meat back or not, I think that plays a big factor in making that decision.
I think it's also important too. Are you the tag holder or are you the supporter?
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Because if you're the supporter, then obviously you're not going to be packing as much gear as the person that actually has the tag.
Correct.
And when you go hunting, and I think for many people that are out there that do it, it's not just, you just don't go hunting when you're the tag owner. You go hunting to support your friends who enjoy the sport of hunting, because that's just as fun. We all know how difficult it is to draw a tag, whether it's an elk or a deer out of state. It's not the easiest thing to do. You need luck on your side. You need to figure out like, okay, what's your strategy in regard to your hunting out of state application process? Who are you going to, back up? And there's some commitments that need to be made before you even put in for your application. And sometimes when you are not the tag owner and you're going to go to be backup support, that kind of plays into the decision. So there's so many different things that kind of go into whether or not you're going to hunt, whether or not you're going to fly, whether or not you're going to drive. And those are some of the topics of conversation that we're going to have tonight.
Cool.
Are we ready?
I think we're ready.
We're ready. One of the first things that we're going to talk about is cost, because that's something that's on everybody's mind. And there's a difference between cost of airfare and the cost of driving. So when we're talking about both modes of transportation, right? Flying, you're talking about airfare, you're talking about baggage, you're talking about a rental car, because you're going to need that other mode of transportation when you're actually at your final destination. Yep. When we're talking about driving, we're talking about gas, time, wear and tear on vehicle, and just getting there, right? Because every second seems like a minute.
Yeah, I mean, time, I think, is a big factor for some people. They only have a certain amount of vacation time available, and the distance too. Like, what is the distance that you're traveling? Are you traveling from California to Arizona or New Mexico, or are you trying to get all the way to Colorado or northern tip of Utah, something like that? So the distance is a big factor. The distance and time, right? So getting on the plane buys you time,
right? And that's one of those things too, where it's like you look at a map and it's like, we were talking about it earlier. You look at Arizona, it's a neighboring state. So jumping in the car and then heading to Arizona is just a no-brainer. Yep. It's going to take you about 7.5, 8 hours, depending on what unit you're hunting or where you're hunting in Arizona. And that's not too much time. You then start extending it out and you're into New Mexico, tack on another 4 hours. So you're at 12 hours, 13 hours. And then you start looking kind of upwards into Colorado and you're talking 14 hours. Yep. Wyoming, you're talking about 14 hours. Utah, different states, they obviously have all different times in terms of driving. So when you do the comparison and you think about that, like, we'll get into a bit more detail a little bit later, but what is the value and what is the worth of time? Because when we talk about taking time off to go hunt and go on a trip, when you drive, you're literally pucking out a day of your time, of your vacation for not only the drive there, but the drive back. So you can technically add 2 additional days to what it is or how many days that you want to go hunting versus flying. You're going to get there a lot faster, but it just may cost you a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. If I've driven to Colorado probably 3 or 4 times. I've driven to Texas. That was the longest drive. Texas was a legit 3 days.
I was going to ask you, how long did that take?
I got there on the 3rd day, mid-afternoon.
So how did you map that out? So when you decided to drive from California to Texas, did you have everything planned out, or was it just kind of go by the fly? And when I start feeling tired, I'm going to look for a town, look for a place to stay, crash out, and
I could lie and say I had it all mapped out, but I really didn't. I just knew I have a toy hauler, right? I knew I wanted to bring the quads. I bought my truck to go on these trips and I wanted to use it. I feel like every time I walk by my trailer and I'm not using it, I'm basically burning money without using all these toys. I think I was pretty adamant. Once we knew that the trip was a go for sure, that we were going to go to Texas and we knew where we were going, which particular ranch, we ended up going to DeFrost's brother's place to hunt whitetail. For me, it was just, I knew I wanted to drive. So, and I drove alone because the rest of the guys all flew there. They didn't have as much time off. For me, I found it to be very relaxing. Two days on the road is a very relaxing drive, especially if you have like a hectic job. It just clears my mind. By the time I got back from that trip, I was very relaxed. I was feeling very relaxed.
Very nice.
By the time I got to Texas, I was actually pretty chill.
Would you prefer driving alone or having somebody else passenger seat?
No, I think everybody would prefer to have somebody with them.
Yeah, totally.
But I don't mind being alone on the trip. Like if you told me, hey, if you go driving, you're going to be by yourself, or otherwise you got to fly, I think I'd always try and drive.
Yeah.
But normally it's because, like I said, I'm pretty set up for it. And also I knew that I was going to be able to bring the meat back. I know we're each getting 2 does or a buck and a doe. And it was like 4 of us. So that's a lot of meat to try and fly back on the plane. So we ended up having, I think, 3 huge coolers in the back of my RV, and it got there no problem. Everything was still frozen by the time we got back. So yeah, for me, I'm a driver. I would prefer to drive. I grew up going cross country trips with my dad and my family. We'd drive from Florida to California, and
wow,
which is like a 6-day drive.
That makes everything else feel like nothing.
Yeah, that's a long haul. It's a long haul. But we had a lot of fun. I had some of my fondest memories on vacation driving cross country with my dad and my sister.
Yeah, I think everybody can say that, right? Like when you go on road trips with your family, that's kind of one of those memorable moments in life in terms of just jumping into the car, having everything in the back, and whether or not you're driving a truck or, back in the days we used to have the Astro van and everything would be packed up in the back, and, you couldn't see out the rearview mirror. But great memories, because you always plan too as a kid, kind of figuring out, okay, how am I going to take the time up, and you'd have the games. But I'd have to agree that my first choice in regard to the mode of transportation is going to be driving. And we're going to be talking about cost, but it's less of cost to me and more of a convenience and the ability to have more things with you.
Yeah, you can definitely take more gear. And for me, the hunting component to it, even if you're staying at, like we're staying at Paul's Defrost's house, his brother's house, his ranch house. And I like the idea of camping anywhere. Like once I got there, I slept. I think I still slept in the RV, but like on the way there, like I think I stayed at a campsite and actually like had a little fire and cooked dinner and stuff like that. Again, I'm feeling like I'm using my gear, right? Like all of the stuff that I've accumulated, I'm actually using it. I don't want to just have like, hoarding stuff and not using gear. So
how many people went on that trip with you guys?
God, I think it was Misha, Paul, and I, and his brother. I don't remember who else went.
So a handful.
Yeah, it's normally not very big because, again, you can probably concur, getting more than 4 people to go on a trip is hard.
Yeah.
To get everybody scheduled together. If you're counting on 10 people going, the trip will get killed off.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to get more than 4 or 5 people to go on any trip. So, it's just kind of how it is. And I've come to terms with that. So I think that I'm also pretty selective on who I invite for certain trips. Mm-hmm. Like the local trips, like our pheasant hunting trip and stuff. I think last year we had maybe 10, 12 people go, but it's a close trip, right? It was not far.
Lone Pine.
Yeah, the Lone Pine Pheasant Club. We hunted there last year. This year didn't happen, but our fishing trips, to get 15 people to agree to go on the fishing trip, that takes a good 6 months.
It does.
So
it does. And it takes a lot of, okay, guys, it's time to put down the deposit and here we go. But when it does happen, it's a lot of fun, right?
Oh yeah, no, there's no question about it. Once everybody gets all their ducks in a row and we show up and we actually do the trip, it's definitely worth it.
Right. No doubt. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I just kind of wanted to go over a couple of quick comparisons in terms of costs, just to kind of lay it down, because one of the things that people may think about is, when you're thinking about hunting and you're going out of state, you might not necessarily put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So to just kind of lay it out, and I just chose California to Arizona, which is quick, right? Okay. And normally what I do, there'd be no question. I would not fly. I would definitely drive, but let's do a quick cost comparison.
Okay.
And we did California to Arizona, and I'm going to start out with flying. So in regard to flying, and what I did is I just basically picked a trip. So when are people most likely going archery elk hunting? It's going to be in the middle of September, come the 3rd week of September. So those are the dates that I picked. And if you go online right now and you book airfare, it's not going to be too expensive from an airfare perspective. It's going to cost cost you $200 for the round trip.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Not bad, right?
Yeah.
And obviously it's going to get a little bit more expensive as you get closer based off of seat capacity, fares, all that stuff. But then you start kind of tacking things on. And one of the first things that people obviously think about when they go hunting is you're not just packing a carry-on, you're packing your weapon. If you're going to be the hunter,
Sure.
You're going to be packing, as you mentioned, a lot of camping gear, and then the gear that you're going to be using to actually do the hunting. So from the clothes that you're going to be using out in the field, if you're one of those guys that change clothes every single day, or if you're one of those guys that do not change clothes throughout the entire hunt, yikes.
Yeah, it happens.
Yes, but it's going to make a difference in regard to baggage because everybody talks about baggage fees when they fly on board an airplane, right? Yeah. And I just kind of averaged it out. I'm thinking to myself that you're going to be taking a cooler to pack back your meat. You're going to be taking your weapon, which is going to be an additional bag. And then you're going to be taking your bag with everything that you need on that hunt. And that's basically going to cost you about $470 in baggage fees.
Okay.
So you're looking at about $45 or $40 for a first bag. And then it just goes on by there. Obviously, a lot of people that fly, they travel, they've got different credit cards, different benefits. So that might change.
But get offset by that. Yeah.
It can offset, but it's not going to offset by much, right? It still goes to the subtotal and the ultimate total of what it's going to cost to fly.
Okay. So $200 plus 470, you're at 690.
There you go. 690.
What's next?
And then let's talk about the rental car because as soon as you get off the plane, you're not going to start hiking to the hills and to your campsite. You're going to have to rent something.
Okay.
So that rental car fee of $410 for a 1 week trip is for something that we're going to need because I'm not going to be going to Arizona or any other hunting destination and picking up like a Honda Insight, right?
That is correct.
I'm going to be picking up at least a mid-sized truck or a 4-door Jeep that's got 4-wheel drive and it's the budget Jeep.
Well, and it's probably, I mean, those are the most expensive rentals, right? Like the other stuff will be 30, 40 bucks a day, but that rental will be more than that. It'll be like 80, 60, 80 bucks a day.
Yeah, it's going to come out to $410, and that's for about like a Toyota Tacoma truck, and that's for an entire week.
Okay. Well, that's still,
and
that's
so we're talking about September. 3rd week in September is the date that I picked because that's basically, if I had a choice to go hunting in the tags that I wanted to draw out of state, I'm going the 3rd week of September.
So you're looking at a little over $1,000.
You're looking at a little over $1,000, right?
Okay.
So when it comes to driving, obviously gas is going to be your biggest penny. Sure. And when you're talking about driving, the average price of gasoline right now is going to be about $4.99. And it's also going to depend on whether or not you're pulling a trailer or not. But I kind of use the math in regard to I'm going to get 15 miles to the gallon. How many gallons is it going to take to drive how many miles?
Gotcha.
And from a round trip perspective, you're looking at about $300 in gas if you're running at about 15 miles per gallon.
Okay.
You're pulling a trailer, you're getting 8, you're getting 9, you're getting 10. Yeah, that's going to be a bit more expensive. And then there's some other things that you can't really necessarily quantify the value of. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it's one of those comparisons that you can kind of think of in your head and kind of, get some emotional feelings for. But you've got time. The time that it's going to take for you to drive to your particular hunt is going to be about 4 times more or more than what it's going to take to fly. And then obviously you got wear and tear. Cars don't last forever. And if you've owned your car for the past 10 years and you're taking it on these types of trips every year, expect to put on just in one trip alone, not just the round trip of getting there and back, but all the driving that you're going to be doing at the location. It's going to put a lot of wear and tear, and you're going to be putting on 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 miles in one trip.
Oh yeah. I remember I blew out on the trailer. I think I wore out 2 tires. One of my axle springs came loose. Anyway, long story short, it was $1,200 and 2 tires, $1,400. That was the Texas trip. The Texas trip was no money savings by driving at all. I think I spent $2,500 on gas. That's when gas was almost like $7 a gallon in California. Boy. Diesel was. Even when I got into Texas, I think it was like, it's still like $3 or $4 a gallon. So, I don't know that. Okay. So you brought up a good point. The other point about the time that you lose driving, hypothetically, the time that you would save driving, you could potentially be ready to hunt the next morning. Right.
Exactly.
Whereas depending on where you go. So in this scenario here, A drive to Arizona is what, a solid 8 hours,
8 hours.
right? So you don't feel like doing very much after you drive 8 hours. I mean,
Right.
that's a long day. Potentially, could you hunt the next morning? Yeah, I suppose. But assuming that you did all your groceries and stuff before you left and you're ready to go. But I think if you were to say, hey, I'm flying at 6 a.m. out of LAX and I'm in Arizona by 8 o'clock,
Right.
you get your car rental, you're in your car rental by 10, you're at the grocery store by 11 or 12, you're pretty much rolling into base camp maybe 4 in the afternoon that day versus rolling into base camp, later that night in your car, I don't know. And then you got to deal with whatever breakdowns you have driving all the way down there. So I think that no matter what, I'll still drive if I can. We're talking about going to Hawaii on that trip, and I was thinking about like all the gear that I would need.
You're not driving there though, right?
I can't drive there. So, but the logistics, even of flying, because that's kind of doing a Hawaii trip or doing a trip to, like, let's say, BC for moose, right? You're going to do a little bit of both. You're going to fly and you're going to drive.
Yep.
I think the context is important in the sense that if you were to go on an outfitted hunt to BC, Vancouver, Canada, the outfitter is going to have all your camping gear there. You basically you don't even need a tent. You need a sleeping mat and your sleeping bag as far as camping stuff. And then obviously your clothing and
makes it easier to fly.
But it makes it easier to fly because you're pretty light. But the trip to Hawaii is more challenging because you have to take all the gear that you need to camp also.
Yep.
Or rent an RV, at which point you still need some camping gear.
Or have family.
Or have family. You get a little benefit, more benefit than we do. But those things are definitely part of the equation. Definitely how you pack and what gear you take. Having a small tent, but it's you could still fit in it.
Everything kind of has its tipping point, right?
Yes.
So the first thing that comes to mind for me is if I'm hunting Arizona, I'm going to drive. If I'm hunting New Mexico, I'm going to drive. If I'm hunting Colorado, Utah, those are all places on my map that I'm going to jump into my truck. I'm going to load up my truck and I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And that's, again, if I'm the tag owner and I'm going to be the hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would reconsider states like Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico if I'm there supporting you or somebody else that I'm going to go hunting with, because I obviously don't have to pack as much. Like, I'm not going to be bringing my rifle. I'm not going to be bringing my bow. So that's going to cut down on the baggage that I need to check. And then I'm going to look for that convenience, because, again, as we're talking about it, we're just talking about Arizona. The last hunting trip that we took last year, we went to Colorado.
Yeah.
We went to Colorado for 8 days and definitely decided to drive there. I did have a tag, unfortunately not successful, but there was somebody on our trip that was successful. Right. But that trip was all about driving, and we left at 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
3:30 in the morning. And you got to take into consideration, as you're driving more east from California, you've got the time change too.
Yeah.
So when you do end up getting at your final destination, it's not going to be California time. You're going to be on whatever time that state is on.
Sure.
And in Colorado, there is a time difference. They're more forward than California. So by the time we got there, you had stops at the gas stations. You had to get some grub. You had to do some more driving. We didn't get there till about 8:30 at night.
Yeah.
So
you got there in one day?
We got there in one day.
Oh, you guys are crazy.
We got there in one day. Right.
That's
right.
crazy.
And my brother-in-law kept on asking, "Oh, Jojo, you like me drive?" And I was like, "Nah, I get him, bro. I get him. But yeah, we got there and we got there in a day. It was just kind of a commitment, right? Because we wanted to go hunting, because that again brings up the point. If you're going to choose to drive, you've got to look at the amount of time that you're taking off.
Yeah.
And you've got to kind of weigh the difference between, do I want more time hunting at a more expensive cost, or do I want to, spend some time driving and cut into that hunting time? Because you're looking at an Oreo cookie of, the outside is drive there and the other outside is drive back. And in the middle is just the good stuff, which is the hunting. So that adds on. So, and that's kind of a deciding factor. But yeah, it took us from 3:30 in the morning when we left, and we got there at 8:30 at night. And it was obviously, we're not going to go hunting at that time. But we got into camp at a good time to kind of set up and then go to sleep, and then wake up at 4:30 in the morning and make the pot of coffee and hit the road to go hunting.
That's a commitment. No, you guys are brutal. That's That's awesome. That's like 15 hours, dude.
It's a long time.
That's a long time driving.
It is a long time. I swear. I listened to a couple of different playlists that,
Twice.
Yeah.
Twice.
And it's one of those playlists. Oh, this playlist is 456 songs. And it's like,
yeah,
this playlist is over. What are you talking about? So we went through quite a bit of songs.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So with that said, would you do that again if you were hunting the same area? Would you drive or would you fly?
I would definitely drive.
Why?
And the reason why I would drive is just because I carry a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And if I fly, I'm not able to carry what it is that I need. So
was there a place that you could rent a motel at within close enough to the hunting area?
There was. So all across the way, as you drive from California to Colorado and you go through Arizona, you go through New Mexico, there's a bunch of places that you do have the opportunity to stay.
No, but in Colorado where you guys were hunting, was there a place to stay locally there? There
was. So it was about 30 minutes away. But, Fish has his trailer and we picked a nice spot to camp. And that was home for the next 8 days.
And I'll be honest with you. That is my preferred method. I would rather camp as part of the whole experience than stay at a hotel. Like after we're done hunting, like to go take a shower and all that, like before you drive home.
Yeah.
No problem staying at a hotel the night before you get home. But as part of the hunt, if the ideal thing would be to have one of your buddies with a trailer or you bring the trailer and have that be part of the base camp.
No, it's awesome.
Yeah. I think anytime you're there more than 2 nights, I think you got to have a trailer there, preferably. That's just look, man, I'm kind of old, man. I don't do tents for a whole week the same, I can stay on a cot in a tent for a week, but like on the floor with the mat and all that shit, I'm kind of over that. I really am.
It's funny because as I got into hunting, a lot of the stuff that people are posting, it's all about backcountry hunting and hiking in, and you've got your pack on your back and you've got your tent, you've got your snacks, you've got everything. So before I even did it, I bought everything.
You bought all the backcountry stuff?
I bought all the backcountry stuff because it's like, that's going to be how I hunt.
Right. And that means 2-3 trips from wherever you killed that thing to get back to camp, plus the stuff you took out there.
So I can count on my hand how many times I've used all that stuff.
Yeah.
0.
Look, Jojo, I'll tell you this. I would do, if we had a scenario that you described on your Colorado trip, you got a base camp with a trailer and water and, all your supplies. And then if you want to do a fly camp for a night, maybe 2, up in an area that looks promising that you don't want to go back and forth on, I could make sense of that. And especially if you have a few guys that you can pack everything in one whack, right? So you have a nice backpack and a nice sleeping bag and a bivvy and a tarp you can put over yourself.
Totally doable.
That's doable. But to say I'm going to be back in 5 days and go walking out,
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially for an elk, that's like you need 3, 4, probably 4 to 5 loads. You're definitely, you're not bringing one bone back.
Yeah.
I remember, I'll tell you kind of a funny story. One of my first hunts where we were we got taken up by the mules off the White River, the South Fork of the White River in the Colorado Rockies, and shot an elk. Actually, before I shot an elk, we were at camp about to take off to go up to the hills. And one of the young packers that was there for the season, I guess it was a greenhorn for the year. And he brought back 2 hindquarters of the elk. Right?
Wow. Bone in,
but he left the hoofs. He left the arm and the hoofs. And they're probably 40 pounds per section of the leg.
Yeah.
When the head guide saw him, he's like, why are there hoofs sticking out of the pack? And he's like, well, I got the hind quarter in there. I'm like, does any of your clients eat the hoof? Did you get a special request for hoof soup? And he was like perplexed, like he didn't, he kind of realized he had fucked up. But
that's messed up.
But he was like, He's like, listen, nobody eats that shit. Cut that shit off and leave it up on the hill, and don't bring hoofs down to camp. I mean, what you do? You're like, I thought you were an animal lover. You could kill the mule here, humping him, making him hump stuff that we're going to throw away. Throw it away up there. Let one of the wolves or the bears eat it up there. Anyway, so my point being, right, the further you go, you're not bringing back any bone.
Right.
You're packing that stuff. You got to bring a ton of.
Those are the things that you got to think about, right? Deboning is going to be your best friend. How do you lessen the amount of weight that you got to pack back?
Right.
So the next topic of conversation, and we've kind of already gotten into this, is about time and what's it worth, right?
I think we killed that already. I think we talked about that quite a bit.
We talked about that quite a bit, and there's some comparisons in regard to, how long is it going to take flying Arizona? It's going to take you about 1.5 hours, Colorado 2.5 hours, Wyoming 2.5 hours flying. Driving, from a driving perspective, Arizona is going to take you about 8 hours. And you've got Colorado at 14 hours and Wyoming via Salt Lake City about 10.5 hours plus the drive to the rest of Wyoming. So, there's obviously a big difference in the amount of time that it's going to take. And we can start getting into kind of the pros and cons, because those are some of the things that we've already been talking about, right? When you talk about flying, it's going to be fast. You're going to save your, the wear and tear on your vehicle. And then also too, what it does do, it allows you to obviously travel further.
Sure.
So when you talk about Western hunting, one of the places that I think a lot of hunters would love to go is going to be Alaska.
Oh, for sure.
So when you talk about Alaska, there's no doubt in my mind that I will never be driving to Alaska.
I think that's a true statement.
The flight alone is long enough.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of find your tipping point in regard to, where it is that your tolerance is to drive.
Yeah.
What's that length of time? What's that state? And then once you cross that line, you've got no choice. You're going to be flying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, when you hunt Alaska, you're going to come to terms with the fact you're going to spend money, that it's going to be an expensive hunt as it is, right? You're going to pay for, first of all, the hunts are expensive over there, right? And then secondary, the logistics of getting around, that's expensive too, because you're very likely going to drive. You're going to fly into Anchorage or Fairbanks, right? And then you're going to rent a car and drive to a next destination, which is probably going to be a short hop airport, and then go and take a bush plane into whatever it is that you're going. So, I mean, I think that's a given. The big benefit I would imagine in hunting Alaska is that all of the sleeping gear will be there. Right. I think you need a sleeping bag, your clothes. You don't even need food. The outfitter will set you up with food. Because logistically, it's just almost impossible to do that on your own.
I tell you what, I'm freaked out of like those bush planes. Those float planes, I've never been on one. I've been on a couple of small planes in my life. Yeah. And planes, helicopters, and motorcycles, those things freak me out, man.
Bush planes are crazy. My dad and I went to Alaska, and we were in a bush plane. We left. We drove into Denali on a bus and rented a car. We drove around to a bunch of different spots. We went fishing, a few local charters. And then eventually we got rid of the rental, and we got picked up at I think we parked the rental car at the bus terminal. And then we went on a bus into the backside of the Denali, which took 4 or 5 hours, maybe a little bit longer. It felt like most of the day, which is a great scenic bus ride. We got to see bears and eagles and all the stuff that Alaska has to offer. But we got a little impatient and we didn't want to take the bus ride out. So we took a bush plane out.
How was that?
That was pretty cool, but freaky, because the plane is kind of like, it was facing the brush, and the pilot's like, go ahead and get in. And I'm like, okay, where's the runway? He's like, from here to over there. You walked on it. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? I was like, it's like a half a football field. What are you talking about? It's a runway. I'm used to seeing the LAX.
Right. Where's all the lights?
It's like 7 miles long or whatever it is. No. Yeah. That plane goes from 0 to vertical, like super quick. So it's crazy. And then, you get up there and you're looking at the mountains and you feel like you're hovering and not even moving, so yeah, bush planes are pretty freaky. I haven't landed on a pontoon on a lake yet.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that's equally freaky.
That's crazy. And when we talk about Alaska, and I've heard so many different stories via podcast or just YouTubing. And one of the things that the hard part about, and we're kind of going off on a tangent here, but who cares? But when you're hunting Alaska, you've got to take into account that weather changes fast.
Oh, for sure.
And if you're dropped off in a location and the plan is to pick you up in the next 6 days, and then boom, there's a storm that comes in, or you've got wind and you've got rain. I mean, there's stories of people waiting an additional week.
Sure.
just for that plane to be able to land to come and pick them up. I mean, logistically, that's just crazy. But plane, you know, those small planes, I don't know, it's just me, but they just kind of freak me out. But, you know, there's obviously pros, cons to flying. There's pros and cons to driving as well. Some of the pros that we've talked about is that you're able to pack more.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, one of the biggest things that I'm able to do when I drive to wherever I'm going hunting to, especially here in the Western states. And I think one of the most important things when it comes to driving and being able to pack more is going to be your coolers.
Oh yeah. Well, and your gear, like how many times have we gone hunting or camping and you forget stuff?
Right.
Like there's always something that you forget.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just irritating what you forgot. And other times it's like something big.
Right. And when you come to driving, right, I don't know about you, but I'm the type of packer that's packing for a hunt that's going to take a lot more than what I really need.
I'm like that. Yeah.
And I can do that when I drive.
Right.
But when I fly, I've got to be a little bit more, okay, how much does this weigh? I don't want it to go over 50 pounds because if it goes over 50 pounds, then it's going to be an additional charge upwards of like $100.
Yeah. It's not a little more. It's not a little more. It's a lot more.
Yeah. Things get real quick when you're dealing with airlines, when you're dealing with weight imbalance. And I get it because weight is fuel and fuel's not cheap and they're burning a lot of fuel, right? It feels good being able to say, do I need this? Maybe, maybe not. Just throw it in there. And when you pack your truck, when you pack your car to go hunting, you find every nook and cranny, right?
Yeah.
Like even underneath the seat where it's like, okay, I can stuff stuff there.
Yeah.
And then you find it 2 years later because you forgot you packed it on the hunt, right?
I've experienced that. Yeah,
and I think everybody that hunts and goes on big road trips kind of experiences that. But for me too, like I'm big on when I go hunting and we've got base camp, we've got a hunting site. It's all about not just enjoying the hunt because I'm, you know, will I go backcountry hunting? I totally would. But for the most part, we've got a good solid base camp. Sure. Somebody's got a trailer. So that to me means, hey, let's enjoy times with friends. And what better way to enjoy time with friends than food. So our hunt or my hunt really starts a couple days before because I'm thinking about the menu.
Sure.
And, you know, for me being from Hawaii, it's all about like cooking for the masses.
Right.
Like let's cook a lot of food. What are we going to bring? And we always overbring. Let's bring the rice, the mac salad, the shoyu chicken, the this, the that, the this, the that. So we're planning that out and I need cooler space.
Yeah.
So it's like for me, when I drive, I can bring multiple coolers. I can bring a ton of food that's already pre-made, that's going to be able to, you know, just be warmed up and we're going to have a good freaking meal while we're at camp, at least for, you know, however many nights that we're there. So that to me is just awesome. I think another pro for the drive is the experience. There's nothing better than being out on the road and seeing country from that level. Sure. And being 100%. Able to drive through it because you're not just driving through the city, you're driving through nature, you're driving through just awesomeness. I mean, literally when we were driving to Colorado, you just look out your window and you'd be staring at antelope, you'd be seeing different animals and just the difference in terms of country. You could be going from desert, you could go from city to desert to mountains to desert to mountains and it is unbelievable.
Yeah,
and that experience is like priceless.
Yeah.
You see that from the plane, but you see it from a different perspective, right? I've been on tons of planes where I'm flying over places that I hunt and you look out the window and it's like, oh man, this is gorgeous. And then you go onto the back of the seat where you got the screen. It's like, where am I? But it's beautiful, but it's different and it doesn't last as long as that drive. So I think that's definitely one of the pros when it comes to driving and choosing to drive where you're going to hunt. And then cons, again, we talked about it enough: time, wear and tear, and then risks. As you mentioned, driving to Texas and kind of blowing that axle or whatever happened on that trailer and what it cost you. There's that added risk because you are driving for, 850 miles round trip, 450 miles one way or what have you. There's potential hazards that are out there on the road that you get caught off guard. And guess what? Something happens to you and you don't have the ability to fix it on the spot. You could be two hours, 100 miles away from the closest town.
Well, to your point, when we were driving through Texas, there was so much roadkill on the road. my outfitter, when we were in Colorado, told me, he's like, hey, listen, you can't drive at night through that road. There was a road that connected Meeker to Craig, Colorado. And that's where the taxidermist was. So I had to go drop off the trophy, the horns to get mounted. And he was like, dude, if you can't go and come back before sunset, don't go. Because there's so many animals on that corridor. Mm-hmm. And he was not kidding. He was not kidding. On my way back, I made it to Craig and back. The sun was setting by the time I rolled into Meeker. And that half hour before the sunset, I probably saw 60 head of deer, you know, and coyotes and all sorts of different game animals. So if you hit them on the road at 40, 50 miles an hour, it's not going to be good.
That's a real risk too.
Yeah, it's mostly that. When I drove through Texas, I definitely did not want to stop in El Paso. That's hazardous for other humans. Hazard is from other humans, not animals. So definitely.
You guys were telling stories about that the other weekend.
No.
I've never driven through El Paso, but I can tell you what, like if my GPS ever leads me there, it is going to be redirected. I'm going to be like, avoid.
It's like fucking Somalia. You should avoid it like fucking Somalia. You don't want to slay there. You don't want to get gas there. It's bad. It's bad. It's gotten worse in the last few years, and it's never been great, but it's pretty bad now.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely hazards of driving for sure.
Yeah, so there's risk involved, right? Yeah. And either way you go, because when you talk about flying there too, everybody talks about being delayed. Everybody's probably experienced that flight that they were booked on and they were super stoked. And I'm going to leave at 12 o'clock. And then it's like, your flight's delayed till 1 o'clock. Yeah. Okay, 1 o'clock, not too bad. Oh, you know what? There's a mechanical. It's taking a little bit longer. Your flight's now going to depart at 4 o'clock. Okay, 4 o'clock. You're kind of stressing out now and you're starting to look at things. So there's that risk as well. Yeah. So no matter what you go, it's all about what you choose to do. There's going to be some things that you weigh out on the side of, again, you know, what are going to be some of the pros and cons of flying? What are going to be some of the pros and cons of driving? What is it going to cost for you to get there? Whether or not you fly, whether or not you drive, you're obviously going to have the component of what it is that you need out of that hunt and your best mode of transportation.
Yep. Well, you know what we haven't talked about? Flying with guns.
That's true. And that's one of those things that you got to take into consideration.
So if you have a connecting flight, you know, like going on this Hawaii trip, I had a connecting flight in Sacramento for, I wanted to say like an hour or two. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I do have a little bit of trauma with flying with guns.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. I don't know if I told you the story, but last year when I went to flying to Zimbabwe, I had a connecting flight like normal in Atlanta. I always have a connecting flight in Atlanta, but I
know who you fly.
I had a shorter layover. I think it was like a 2.5 hour layover. And apparently that was not enough. The 4 hour layover. The first time I went, I had a 4 hour layover. And that's definitely enough time to get the guns from one plane to the other and get over there. So anyway, I had an air tag. By the way, if you don't travel with air tags on your bags, you should get a few air tags and throw them in your bags and name them different stuff.
It's the smartest move ever.
Yeah.
We have that technology, use it. And it's worth it.
And it works everywhere. So
it's worth it.
So we were in Atlanta. Actually, my guns got left twice. So in Atlanta to Johannesburg, I got on the plane and I could see my gun on my phone on the little find my air tag. And it was on the other side of the airport while I was on the plane. And I was like, and it was, you know, I named it G bag, right? Gun bag. And dude, that thing ticks off and it's the air tags further and further and further and further away. No. It really sucked. So anyway, we landed in Johannesburg, and over in Johannesburg, the cops pick up all the guns, get delivered to there's a little police substation there. And I don't know, we were there probably about a half an hour, and like, Alex, the guy in Johannesburg, you pay somebody to get you through customs with the guns. Alex, looks like your guns didn't make it on the plane. I'm like, I figured it. Yeah. So
rub it in.
So anyway, they looked it up and they came the next day. So that was irritating. What is more irritating is in Africa, the intercontinental flights. So the flights from, that's not the right way to say it, but the inter flights from Zimbabwe to South Africa, they're run by old South African Airlines, which is called Airlink now. And you have to have a 2-week notice to tell them that you're traveling with guns.
Man.
So you get a permit to travel with your guns on the flight that you booked 2 weeks prior. Mm-hmm. So if you miss your flight, you got to do all this
You're
effing
screwed.
rigmarole shit to get the gun on tomorrow's flight. So my guns got here. They got here. I actually had to stay one extra night, but my guns didn't get here from Atlanta till the 10 o'clock flight that lands in Joburg at 10 o'clock the next day. So I put it around, and I think I had lunch, and I went to the local stuff to do out there. But anyway, the big rigmarole was then rescheduling the permit to be able to fly from Johannesburg to Zimbabwe the next day. So we got that done, and then the guns missed me also.
So you're in Africa at this point, and you're traveling from spot to spot.
Yeah, well, they told me, oh, well, go to Zimbabwe, we'll ship you your guns. I'm like, no, we're not doing all that. By the way, if anybody ever tells you that, yeah, don't do that. Just stay the extra day. Like, in a Home Alone, when you leave your kid at the... No. You go back. You don't keep going. You don't keep traveling while your kid got left.
You wait.
You wait till you get your gear. Because you got to go customs again in the new country, right? It's not like you're flying from LA to Colorado or something like that, right? So
you're not going state for state. You're going country to country.
That's right.
So there's so many different regulations that surround that.
Yeah, I would have never gotten my rifles. And I had the double in there. I had the double rifle, my 500 Nitro, and the other ones, which are very, very sought after type of guns in Africa. They're definitely, I would have never gotten those guns back.
That's one of those things, though. You do have to take into consideration when traveling with guns.
Yeah.
Because there are so many airline regulations and, state regulations when traveling.
Sure.
And when you travel with guns, some of the things that you do have to remember, it's not just simple, right? You just can't pack your gun into a suitcase, go to the airport, see the counter agent, check in your bag and say, I'm ready to go. You're going to have a gun case. You're going to have to, show the airline that it's not loaded. You're going to have to pack your ammunition a certain way. Yeah. And oh, by the way, there's only so much ammunition that you can pack when you go with you. Yeah. Sometimes it has to be in a separate suitcase. Sometimes it can be with the gun safe itself. Then you got your TSA approved locks. And there's so many times where people just don't do enough research and knowing when they're traveling, especially via an airplane to their hunting destination, that so many things can go wrong. Checking your gun, everything goes fine. And then you're through security. And then all of a sudden you got a page. Ladies and gentlemen, if your name is Jojo, please come back down to the counter. We have an issue with your bags. And then come to find out, it's like, crap, right? I'm supposed to have TSA approved locks. So there's so many different things there that you've got to kind of take into consideration. Airlines regulations, there's a ton. And it's not just the guns. The other thing that you got to think about is the meat yourself, right? Or the meat itself, is because when you do bring something down, one of the things, and you can't account for, and this is why too I like driving, is that if you're going to be flying and you're lucky enough and you work and you hunt hard enough to be successful in bringing an animal down, it's a matter of how are you going to bring that meat home?
Right.
And that's another thing to take into consideration, right? So when you're driving, the good thing is if you got your coolers, you can just buy regular old ice.
Sure.
Put the meat on the ice and then drive home. And if the drive takes too long, you just load back up on ice.
Sure.
Well, you can't necessarily do the same thing on an airline.
Especially if you get delayed.
If you get delayed, because it's perishable.
It's a problem.
So most airlines will say that meat that you're packing and you're bringing back is going to have to be frozen.
Right. Already frozen.
It's going to have to be already frozen because it's going to have to, as a perishable item, withstand the test of the travel time, plus the chances that your flight might get delayed and take you so much more time.
So can you pack it with dry ice?
You can. So if you do pack it with dry ice, there's going to be different regulations with that because dry ice is considered a hazardous material and there's certain ways that you have to package it. So you can only carry up to 2.5 kgs of dry ice and it's the cooler itself has got to be vented. So if you have access to it, it definitely works and you can definitely get away with it.
So
you've just got to follow the
vented.
It's got to be vented.
So you got to get like a Yeti or something with that little vent. Some of the, I mean, that's not Yeti. I think maybe the new Pelicans have that vent.
Yeah, so some of them have vents. Like if we go back to the basics and you got that big igloo cooler that you're buying at Sam's Club or Costco, right? Yeah. And most of the times they have that plug on the side. So if you keep that open, that's enough to be properly vented. So that's something that needs to take place when you do ship or you pack with dry ice. So there's a lot of things in regard to that. And also too, something to take into consideration when you are flying is that you're trying to shed weight. Sure. So there are times when you are flying that you're not going to want to carry any bones. So
I would say I would just debone it.
You got to,
because you're going to throw it away. You wouldn't. Why would you fly to the other side of the country and throw the bone away at home?
And you've got to save the weight, right? So it's an absolute must versus if you are driving and you've got enough cooler space, that's something that you could technically do later. And for me, when I'm out in the field and I'm hunting and I'm successful, one of the things that I like the most is really taking care of the meat and taking 100%. My time with it versus rushing through it. Right. So if I'm flying and I'm trying to debone it and say I killed it on the last day of the hunt and I've got to get everything prepared and packed, then I'm not going to spend as much time as I want to in preparing that meat for travel. Versus if I was driving in and I killed it on the last day, I'd at least be comfortable with knowing that I can take the bone, pack the bone, drive home. But when I do get home, I'm going to be able to take care of that meat as I want it, as I want to, because, for me, that's kind of like one of those things that I kind of find joy in, even though it takes forever, getting into that and just, really
it's part of cooking
taking care of the meat.
That's definitely part of cooking it.
Yeah. So those are some other things.
What are some of the other stuff you want to talk about?
Some of the other things are just know the regulations. When you are hunting out of state, California has laws, it has regulations, and some of the things that you're going to have to do, the DFW 901 form. So anytime you're bringing in animals into California, dead fish into California, and you're out of state, you do have to fill out that form. And if you do not fill out that form, and sometimes you're not going to be asked for it, but you need to and are required to do so. And then there's also CWD regulations. So California has not been hit hard with that CWD, but you've heard of it. It's all over the place, right? Right. So to kind of prevent that from taking place. So things like you can't bring back through the border of California or the state line of California, anything to do with the spine of the animal. Spine or brain. So you've got to kind of figure out what you're going to do with that kind of stuff. And then driving, you got road conditions, obviously. We've already talked about airline regulations, and then transport of meat we discussed, and ultimately the rack, the trophy.
That's right. There's a place in Meeker where there's a taxidermist, and you guys could check this out depending on where you guys go hunting, but there'll be a local taxidermist if you did get a rack that you really like that you want to keep. There'll be places that you can just drop it off and they'll handle and process it for you, and it's not terribly expensive. If you do a skull mount, you're probably looking at about $150 to get it, defleshed and all that. And then you don't have to worry about, eventually when they ship it to you, you're just going to get a clean skull. You don't have to worry about the CWD and that type of exposure. You're just going to get something that's be ready to mount on your wall.
Those are things that you got to consider as well too. Because if again, it comes down to cost, if you've got the money, one of the things that you want to do when you're researching your out of state hunt is also look at your options in regard to people that are going to be able to take care, handle, pack, and take care of all that meat.
Yeah.
You don't always necessarily have to bring everything back whole into the state of California. If you kill something, you're on an 8-day trip. Yeah. Day number 2, you get lucky, you find the bull of your lifetime, you take it down. You're going to want to know where the meat processors are. So it's always good to know where you're going, kind of research that area. Where are the meat processors? And normally things outside of California are cheaper, but it may be a good idea and a good deal to kind of take it down there. They'll handle everything for you. So by the time you go home and you're camping for the next 5 days because you're staying out in nature and having a good time, you're staying out in the outdoors. And by the time you're ready to go home, it's all ready for you. Yeah. You've got your ground, you got your steaks, you got everything that you need.
And it's all packaged.
It's all packaged.
And frozen. The outfitter that we used in Colorado, he did me a solid and took the elk meat down to the processor because we were still there. We were there, I don't know, we stayed there probably another 3 or 4 days, 3 days after I shot the elk. And he did me a solid, took it down there. And by the time I came off the mountain a couple of days later, the meat was ready to be picked up, and I just paid him, and it was all frozen. He sold me some dry ice, and I packed the cooler, and that was frozen solid by the time they got to California a couple of days later.
Yeah.
So to your point, you got to do a little bit of research and understand what are the resources that are around there, right? Like in my mind, one of the things that kind of gave me some anxiety about this hunt in Maui that I want to do. How are we going to get all this stuff packaged and ready to roll and all that and get it over here? And I think that maybe after Fish does this first trip and kind of sorts it all out, then he can kind of give me some answers on some of the blank spots that I had. But our other buddy, he killed a pig over there, and he was able to get it all get it processed enough to be able to bring it back. He actually I think he did an Axis here too, right? Ramon did.
Yeah. I brought an empty suitcase to bring back his rack.
Right on. So Jojo, what other stuff you want to cover about traveling by air or on the road?
I think there's so much to talk about, but we've covered, quite a bit tonight. And if anybody has any questions, again, we'd really love for you all to like and subscribe. If you have any questions,
if you have any topics that you want to have us cover,
that's awesome.
That'd be cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a lot of topics to talk about, but obviously we want to talk about what people out there that are listening, what they want to hear about.
Right on. So guys, if you haven't done so, please make sure you like and subscribe, hit the little bell so you get the notification. And for the most part, tell us some of your hunting stories. Give us in the comments below, kind of give us a little, if you got any videos, you got any pictures of some of your hunting adventures where you had to travel either by car or by plane. That'd be kind of cool to take a look at that.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things too. I mean, the pictures that come out of driving or flying, they're absolutely amazing.
The pictures definitely have some pretty nice vistas that add to the overall adventure.
Yeah, definitely like seeing other people's trips too. It's always nice to see.
So guys, next week, I want to give you guys a little bit of a preview.
Exciting.
Next week, we've got a special guest that Jojo's put together. Jojo, why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, so Chad hooked us up with a connection, Devin O'Day from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And Devin is the conservation manager here in California. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on in California, especially when we talk about hunting and fishing. And one of the topics that we do want to discuss and kind of get everybody involved in from a conservation perspective and being able to fish perspective is the marine protected areas here in California. So back in 1999, and we'll get more into details come the show with Devin, California kind of set something out there in regard to preserving and conserving fishing here in California on the West Coast. And it's up for review right now. So there's a lot of people putting in petitions saying, hey, we shouldn't be able to fish here. We shouldn't be able to catch this. We shouldn't be able to catch that. So they're taking a look in regard to these marine protected areas. And some of the petitions that are up for review right now really affect where you can and cannot fish. And as a fisherman, that's super important to me. And if you fish as well, it's going to be super important to you. Devin's got all the information. I can't wait till we have the opportunity to talk to him. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to learn a lot. I've got a ton of questions. He's got all the information, and we hope to get people involved in the cause to make sure that we're able to continue to do what we love to do in regard to fishing here in California. Absolutely. Very excited about the show. We got a great show next week. Guys, what we're trying to do is put out a podcast every week. So with your help, with your interactivity, with your comments and your likes and subscribe, hopefully we'll be able to hit our threshold of 50. Whoa.
The first 50.
And then eventually 50 with a K after it would be even more fantastic.
That's right. That's right. Folks, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Rifle Rods and Broads Show with Jojo and Langosta.
Yeah.
See ya.
Aloha.